Today's story is by a user named NoIssue9916 and their unfortunate run-in with a creature while out at a friend's house. Please leave a comment and hit that like to keep this channel going. Thank you. For the sake of privacy, I'm going to call myself Howard. A few years ago, I'd say this would have been around late 2018, so I was about 13. Me, my mom, my stepdad, and my grandmother all spend the weekend at my mom's friend's house, which sits about a mile off the coast of Lake Huron in northern Michigan. I was extremely nervous since my mom told me it was a heavily forested area. I was scared of the wolves and or bears that live up there, and I love forests, just not the things that live in them. Kept telling my family I don't want to go, there could be something in the woods there. Either my mom or my stepdad would try to comfort me by saying something like, "It'll be fine, if anything happens we'll protect you," or "There's a lot of us, nothing would be brave enough to fight us," which kind of helped because turned out there would have been a lot of people there, 7 people and the 4 of us. It was about 5 p.m. and we left our house in the southern regions of Michigan, and it was about 8 p.m. when we arrived. It was the lake house in the outskirts of Bay City. When we got there, I was reminded of my fear from earlier. The house sat in a large clearing and was surrounded by miles of forest on all sides. I got a sense of dread at the sight, but I tried to ignore it. I met the friends and they were pretty nice. I got pizza from the local pizza place and I mostly forgot about the forest. I was sitting in the kitchen watching YouTube on my phone. They were all hanging out in the basement where there was a TV, a pool table, and all sorts of cool stuff. It was just after 11 p.m. when I heard something scraping up against the wall outside on the other side of the stove. I was sitting a good 10 feet from the said stove. For perspective, the main floor sat about 5 feet off the ground, and there were stairs that led up to a small porch. I noticed the sound when the video I was watching ended. It sounded like multiple shard things scraping against the wall. I was too scared to look for the cause of the sound. Suddenly the sound stopped and it walked into the backyard. It was a deer. I was immediately relieved as I was taught deer were a symbol of peace and freedom, so I smiled as it pranced into the forest beyond the backyard. My mom asked if I was okay, saying I still looked spooked. I told her the truth. I heard scraping outside, but it was just a deer. She chuckled. "Oh yeah, I've heard their antlers scraping against stuff so many times, and it startles me every time." Then she told me they were all going to bed, and so did I. I went to the bed on the couch in the living room, and I brought my Jurassic World blanket. I slept rather well despite my fear of the surroundings. The woman, my mom's best friend at the time, the person she came to see specifically, who for the sake of privacy we'll call Carissa, woke me up saying, "Hey Howard, wake up buddy, it's bright outside." I got up rather quick since I still didn't fully trust the place. I checked my phone and it was somehow 2 p.m. I guess I slept in. I went outside and they had a cute husky named Blitz. I played with him for at least 2 hours. He was super playful. He had a soccer ball he liked fetching, so I made him fetch the ball for a while. We then went to the lake, all 10 of us, but I didn't want to go. I'm not a social person, but my mom gave me no choice. One of my worst fears came true. When we got to the beach, the friends had their own friends who had kids. Before I continue, I want to preface this by saying I don't like kids, especially little kids. That's exactly what they were, 3 little kids. I don't remember how old they were, but they were young, no more than 6. Little kids annoy the hell out of me. I had a cousin in my home state in Tennessee that was half my age, so I know how little kids are. I brought my phone and I just sat just beyond the tree line. The woods were right across from the beach, just a few dozen yards. I was okay with this patch of forest. It was bright as hell and there were so many people there, so I felt safe, and I watched YouTube again. I was sitting there for a good hour and a half, and the minutes that followed was when the strangeness reared its head. I remember every detail of those moments. I was watching the Hodge twins, specifically their video where they read an email from a guy who asked if he should go back to his ex-girlfriend. I was quietly laughing, but my laughter was quickly killed by something deeper in the forest. I heard what sounded like my grandmother calling to me from a few hundred feet away. I was about to get up and follow her voice when I stopped myself, because I remembered she was sitting next to my mom on the beach. I could see her in the opposite direction of the voice. The voice sounded slightly off, like my grandmother was out of breath. I could hear her saying something vaguely that sounded like, "Howard, come here, boy," which is something she always says when she needed me. She'd be calling me boy. I noped the hell out of there and went back to my grandmother and sat in the empty chair next to her and told her, "I heard someone calling me in the woods and they had your voice." Her and my mom looked me in confusion, and my mom said, "They sounded like her?" And I explained, "The voice sounded like grandma does when she's out of breath, like when she climbs the stairs to her apartment, exactly the same." They both looked at me like I was an idiot. They said I was making it up and I was trying to just go home, which made no sense to me. Still doesn't make sense. I spent the next 5 minutes insisting that it was true, but they kept saying I was making excuses. But I knew better. I knew exactly what I heard. I sat next to them for the rest of our time at the beach. About an hour later, we headed back to the house. Carissa's friends came with us, the couple with the 3 kids. 5 of us rode in one vehicle, and the others rode in another vehicle. I rode with the people I knew. It was pretty dark by that point, not pitch black, but you still would have needed light to see. We were surrounded by forest for a good minute of the drive back. The tree line was maybe 6 feet away from each side of the van. For the moment, we were surrounded by woods, and I could have sworn I saw a dark figure running with us just beyond the tree line, but I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. It was about a 5-minute drive from the beach to the house. When we got there, the kids raced into the house, playing, being loud and rambunctious and all, and I waited for my mom to go inside before I did, to avoid as much interaction with the kids as possible. Once we all settled in, the parents of the kids told me I should play with the kids, since I was a kid too, but I didn't know what to do. So they guided me outside with the 3 little shits, then told us we could play with Blitz. I approached the dog with the kids behind me, and I crouched down and started to pet Blitz. He was really friendly and clearly seemed to enjoy it. He rolled over on his side, wanting me to rub his belly, and so I did. After a minute or two of petting him, I grabbed the ball and gestured him to play, but he didn't move. I figured he was too tired. Then when out of nowhere, the oldest of the kids said, "Hey, you stupid dog," and kicked Blitz in the ass. Pretty hard too. Clearly annoyed with him for not playing. The dog barked angrily, quickly got up and tried to pounce the boy, but I grabbed Blitz's collar before he could do anything, and the family ran out to see the commotion, and Carissa came to calm the dog down, and the kid was crying his eyes out. I went over to my mom as she asked what happened. I told her the kid kicked Blitz for not wanting to play, and Blitz wasn't having any of it. I told her the kid deserved it, and it seemed like she somewhat agreed with me, saying, "Well, he shouldn't hurt animals like that, or that's gonna happen." They all went back inside, taking the kids with them, and Carissa was mad at the dog for simply protecting himself. I sat next to him and continued petting him, this time for a solid 5 minutes, praising him, calling him a good boy, since it was the kid's fault for being an asshole. I then heard a stick break in the woods about 100 yards away, but it sounded less like a stick and more like a branch being crushed. As soon as I heard the sound, Blitz shot up and stared in the direction of the sound. He got up and sniffed the air and started growling. His fur stood up at a cartoonish level and he was baring his teeth. He scooched next to me, clearly trying to protect me from whatever was over there, and whatever it was clearly a threat. He started barking again, but this time, the barks were out of pure anger. His bark sounded primal. I stood there trying to adjust my eyes to the darkness, trying to see something. My heart was pounding. I thought it was going to explode. Suddenly, Blitz took off into the forest after whatever was there, completely ripping out his tie-out stake. I ran into the house and told everyone that Blitz ran after something in the woods and I couldn't stop him. Then Carissa's husband, I'll call him Steve, and my stepdad. Steve grabbed his rifle from their room and sprinted out the door, followed by my stepdad who got his pistol from the basement as he brought it with him, and they both charged into the woods. They were very fit guys, so I figured they could either shoot or beat up whatever was out there. I thought it was a person or maybe a bear or wolf that was out there. We turned off all the lights in the house, opened the window that faced the direction they went, and we sat there for a good 5 minutes or more. We saw and heard nothing. Another 5 minutes, nothing. After a few more minutes, we heard very faint gunshots coming from the woods. It sounded like he was quite far away. They must have been a mile away by now. Carissa wanted to go out there and look for him, but Steve ordered we stay inside no matter what happens, and my mom reminded her of that. We stayed up for a few hours hoping they would come back at some point, but they didn't. We hesitantly went to bed and I could hear Carissa bawling her eyes out in the basement. I slept on the couch again and I made sure the curtains were closed just in case the stranger returns. I took about 20 minutes to fall asleep, so I decided to listen to some ASMR, specifically Goodnight Moon. If nothing else could bring me comfort, then she can. I woke up early the next morning. I checked my phone and it was 9 a.m. The sun was shining through the cracks of the same, and everyone was still asleep. I got up and let out a big stretch before walking over to the back porch. I opened the curtains and what I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. I saw Steve and my stepdad, or what was left of them. Whatever that thing was last night, whatever they and the dog went after, it tore them apart. I could barely recognize them. That's how mutilated they were. My stepdad was missing his lower half. His inside were sprawled out all over the place. Steve's throat was torn out, his legs missing, and his chest was torn open. He had huge claw marks all over his body. They both looked like parts of them were eaten by something big. I noticed all of this in the split second that I was staring, and out of shock and disgust, I blurted out, "What the fuck?" at the top of my lungs. That woke up everyone and they all came running up the stairs. It felt like a stampede with all the people running. They all saw the horrifying scene. That moment, everyone started screaming and crying. My mom and Carissa both ran to theirs and held the two men. The mother of the kids kept them back so they couldn't see the death, and her husband called 911. After 10 minutes or so of panic, the cops arrived and we showed them the gruesome scene, and they both gagged and nearly vomited at the sight. They called for the chief and the medical professionals to take care of the bodies. My mom and Carissa sat there next to the bodies, absolutely devastated, crying a river until the paramedics arrived, who then took the bodies away. The cops stayed and questioned us. I didn't hear what the cops asked them, but after some time they started to question me, and since I'm a kid, they took their down stern tone a few notches. And they asked me questions like, "How did you discover the bodies? What happened the night before? And did you hear anything through the night?" And of course I answered truthfully. After questioning everyone, they left and we all sat there in dismay. My mom broke the silence by saying, "What could have done that?" And I told her, no animal could do something like that. My grandmother asked, "Why would the thing leave them there? Is it taunting us?" And after a few minutes of discussion, we decided to Google things like biggest animals in Michigan, bear claw marks, deaths in Bay County, and turns out there were quite a few missing persons reports in the area, and the victims were either found dead, found alive but injured, or never found at all. I had a big imagination growing up, so I googled folk tales from the region and there were a bunch of results. the Michigan Dogman, Bigfoot, the Wendigo, and some other creatures that don't fit the description of what we're dealing with here. I watched the videos on some of these creatures. I watched a video talking about Bigfoot. Definitely not it. Then I watched one about the Dogman. The claw marks on Steve and my stepdad were similar, but much bigger and deeper than the video showed. Not it. I even watched a video about skinwalkers, but no, we're too far north for them. Then I watched a video about the Wendigo, and the realization hit me like a freight train. Dear Lord, I thought. I wanted to show the others, but I knew they'd get mad at me and yell at me, so I didn't tell them. I still tried to convince myself it was really just a bear, but I knew better. We then sat in silence for another hour or so. Everyone was crying except me. I didn't know Steve and my stepdad was an asshole, so I was more shocked than sad. The silence was broken again, but by the sound of whimpering outside. We looked outside, and it was Blitz. He was hurt but alive. We all ran outside to greet him as he limped towards the house. He had a claw mark along his body. It ran along the entire side of his body, but it wasn't deep at all. My guess was he just got caught in the crossfire of the confrontation last night. Carissa and the mother of the kids both rushed Blitz to the vet, but don't worry, he survived. After we calmed down from excitement of the dog's survival, we returned to the house, and so did the woman after a few hours. I went to the basement after some time and found 3 kids all cowering in the corner, crying. Apparently they saw Steve and my stepdad as the medics put them in body bags. Their mom held them and comforted them, but they never calmed down. We were all in a state of panic. We didn't feel safe in the house at all, and we didn't go outside at all that day. We stayed in the house and watched TV all day, and we didn't eat either. It was around 1 a.m. when we all went to bed, but not me. I've always had really bad paranoia, and tonight, my paranoia was 10,000-fold. I would jump at every sound. The house creaked a lot and it scared me every time. It was maybe 3 a.m. when I heard a familiar sound, antlers scraping along the wall outside. The same wall as the deer from the first night, and a sense of comfort came over me, which was quickly overcame by dread when I noticed the scraping was coming from directly on the other side of the wall. The deer from the other night was scraping its antlers, but it sounded like it was coming from the floor. Since I mentioned the main floor is about 5 feet off the ground, but this time the scraping was coming from directly in front of me, and my heart sank. What can stand 10 feet off the ground? I truly thought it was a bear, but a grizzly bear. They're massive, and it was probably marking the house with its claws. I stood there in darkness and silence, waiting for the sounds to stop, and they did, so I quickly made my way to the back door. I crouched down and peeked through the curtain, oh so slightly. Thankfully, they had lights around the backyard, along the tool shed, along the railing of the back deck. There were even light poles that ran all the way from town into the clearing here, and the moon was fully visible too, so I could see outside very well. What I saw was worse than anything I could ever have imagined. It was a creature that looked like a deer of sorts, but it was more the size of a moose. It had huge antlers, bigger than any cervid should have, its mouth slightly agape. It had razor-sharp teeth. Its head was just the skull, no flesh at all. It had fur along its back that looked matted and worn out and had a dark brown, almost black color. The most striking feature of this thing was its size. It was walking quadrupedal and still seemed to be close to 7 feet tall at the shoulder. I let out a quick gasp. I couldn't control my fear. I must have heard it, because it shot its head back towards the house. I watched in horror as it stood up on its hind legs. It stood there and looked at the house intently, which let me get a good look at this thing. It easily stood 12 feet tall. It looked incredibly scrawny and malnourished. Its arms were long, reaching its knees. and its hands ended with the huge claws. All those features matched up that of a Wendigo. At least that's what the video told me. It slowly started walking towards the house. I jumped back on the couch, got under my blanket, and waited for it to go away. I heard its footsteps come onto the deck, but its footsteps were incredibly quiet, which explains why I only heard it when it stepped on the branch the previous night. I saw its shadow creep up to the back door. Its shadow consumed the entire curtain. No moonlight peeked through as it just stood there. My heart sank to my stomach when I remembered I didn't lock the back door before trying to go to bed, and as that thought ran through my head, I heard the door slowly open. I felt the cold air rush in as sweat rushed down my body. I could see the breeze hit the curtains. I then saw a head slowly grab the curtain and slide it aside. The creature opened the door fully so it could fit through, and even then its crown of antlers slowly scraped against the doorway as it walked in. It calmly and quietly searched the kitchen, looking everywhere. I could tell it was looking for something. I watched it intently as it skulked through the darkness towards me. As it walked up to me, now merely few feet away, it seemed to stare at me as if it knew I was there, but couldn't do anything. And I noticed it had a nasty bite in its neck. Blitz damn near ripped its throat out the previous night. It had this awful smell of death, like rotten meat and shit mixed together. I could barely keep myself from vomiting on the beast. Then it did something that surprised me. It extended its hand towards me, not like it was inspecting me or toying with me, but it reached out its hand like it wanted me to take its hand. But I learned from the video that the Wendigo loves to trick people, so I just sat there, frozen in fear. I stared at it, its hand still extended, as if things couldn't get stranger. It started talking to me. It had a voice similar to my grandmother's.
"Come with me, boy,"
in the same fashion she always does. But the voice was off. Instead of sounding out of breath, it sounded annoyed, like how she would sound if I was taking too long. I continued to ignore it, which I think pissed it off, because it gave up, put its hands down, and leaned closer to my face. The smell was unbearable. I just laid there and closed my eyes, accepting death. I felt it open its nasty maw to do me like it did Steve and my stepdad. At that moment, I heard someone coming up the stairs from the basement. The beast heard them and ran out the back door, and in a matter of 2 seconds, it had already vanished into the trees. When I got up to close the door, my grandmother and my mom both appeared behind me. My grandmother said, "Why is the door open, boy?" And I replied, "It was hot in here, and no bear is fast enough to get in here before I close it." They both stood in the kitchen getting something from the fridge, and I noticed the beast left a little bit of blood on the floor, which I quickly wiped up with a paper towel. Thankfully, I got rid of it before they saw it. If they saw the blood, there's no way I could have explained myself. They don't believe in monsters. The next morning, I was more than happy to get out of that hellhole. We drove all the 3 hours back home. I can't believe I met the Wendigo. Nothing in my entire life will ever come close to being as scary as that weekend. A few weeks later, we had a closed casket funeral in Grand Rapids, and my mom stopped talking to them after that. I guess there was just too much trauma between them, but they let us have Blitz after that, since our place was much more remote than their place. His scars have healed since then, but his fur is a slightly different color where the scars once were. What was crazy is that about a month after the funeral, Carissa and the whole family went missing overnight. Her friend, the friend's husband, and the 3 kids. Apparently their disappearance was discovered by the same cops that they called that weekend. We read the missing persons report, and all that was found was one blanket and a shoe that belonged to one of the kids. The house was resold about 2 years ago. God forbid the new family has a run-in with that monster.